In philosophy, an argument isn't a fight. It's a structured set of reasons intended to support or prove a conclusion. In the following module, we'll examine what exactly an argument is, including its key components, premises, and conclusions. So speaking of an argument, right, we know logic's all about arguments. Okay, well, what is an argument? I've given you kind of a, let's say, formal definition there, right? A series of claims organized in an effort to defend a position on an issue. So a few things to take away from that, right? The things mentioned in the argument, if there is an argument there, right? Something is going to be provided. They're called claims or statements, right? Things that are true or false. But there's something that's provided that's intended to, whether it's support or prove, and that kind of gets at the difference between deductive and inductive. One way or another, though, one statement or maybe a few statements or claims are offered in an effort to support or prove the conclusion or the position on the issue. So the conclusion is just stipulating or stating a position or perspective on whatever the issue is that's being discussed, right? So there's always an issue involved or related to an argument. And the conclusion, okay, so that's one of the pieces, right, is always kind of spelling out a position or perspective on that issue. So the question or the issue could be, you know, what's the best philosophy class? And the conclusion could be philosophy 100, right? Could be or it might be something like philosophy 100 is the best philosophy class. Okay, so that might be their position on the issue. The issue was, what's the best philosophy class? Their position is philosophy 101, or 100 rather, is the best philosophy class. But that's not good enough. They can't just come in and scream at the top of their lungs, philosophy 100 is amazing. It's the best philosophy class ever. Okay, it doesn't matter how many times they say that, if they get up on their chair and shout it as loud as they can. Right, what's the problem? Why is that not an argument? Nobody? Because there's nothing given to think, right? They're not offering any reason to think that that's true, right? They need to give us a reason too. So that's the other ingredient, right? So there's two basic ingredients. Premise, there might be more than one reason given. There always needs to be at least one. So we call those reasons given for believing that the conclusion or the position on the issue is the case or true, right? We call those reasons premises, okay? So there has to be at least one reason given, maybe 10 million, right? But at least one reason given for then that conclusion, their stance or position on the related issue. Okay, so if philosophy 100 is the greatest class ever is their conclusion, they need to give us a reason to think that. Well, Dr. Musil's teaching it, so duh. Right? Yeah, I got some affirmative head shakes, or at least one. All right, so yeah, hopefully that's starting to make some sense. Okay, so we have these basic building blocks. You're only going to have one conclusion in any given argument. Okay, and then you need at least one, maybe 10 million premises. Okay. Now the same statement or claim, individual statement or claim, could be the conclusion in one argument, and then that could also then be a premise for a different argument, right? But there will only be one conclusion in each argument. Okay, and then whatever that conclusion is, there better be at least one, if not several, then reasons or premises for thinking that. Okay. Does that kind of make sense? Starting to make sense? How many of you guys had familiarity with this stuff coming into the class? Nobody. Okay. So this is all like a foreign language for you guys. But anyway, so this kind of basic idea of what an argument is makes sense. Okay, you need those two basic ingredients. So at this point, we should be able to sort of answer this, right? No matter what's being said, right, whether it's verbally or you're reading something, you should be able to answer this. Okay. All right. Find something that looks like a conclusion, right? A position or perspective on some issue. Is there something that looks like a conclusion? And then is there something that seems to be offered, right, to support that conclusion? A reason to think it's the case, okay? Or a premise, right? As long as you have those two things, then you have an argument. Now, whether it's any good, totally separate issue, right? And so sometimes rookies, you guys are all rookies, sometimes rookies, because an argument is so bad, it feels weird for them to say that there even is an argument there, right? But it doesn't matter how bad or ludicrous maybe the premises are, right? It's still an argument. It's just a bad argument, right? So be sure you have, whether there's actually an argument here, that's one issue where it's distinct from, how good the argument is, okay? Okay, so let's move forward then. Let's do a quick example. So, like I say up there, right? Identify the conclusion and the premises in the following. So I always think it's helpful to kind of try to find the conclusion first and then work your way back. So does anything, so it reads, in a democracy, the poor have more power than the rich because there are more of them and the will of the majority is supreme. Does anybody in here think they can locate what sounds like a conclusion in that? For sure, right? The first, and by the way, the conclusion could be at the very beginning, could be at the very end, could be in the middle of what's said. Okay? But as you suggested, it's, in this case, it's the very first thing that's said. Okay? The poor have more power than the rich. And then what are the reasons or reason given? Yeah, so there's actually two here, right? So good job noticing that. Okay, so we have, there are more of them, which technically, right, we didn't even need and what follows. We already have one reason given, and that would have already been an argument. Okay, just that first part. It wouldn't have been near as good of an argument, but it still would have been an argument. And then add that second part, though, it turns into a much better argument. So you were correct in identifying there are actually two distinct things that can be true or false here. There's two distinct premises, right? It might be the case that there are more of them. That might be true or that could be false. And this separately, right, the will of the majority or whoever there's more of is supreme. That could be true and that could be false as well. Right, so two actually distinct premises for them believing this. Now, what's also interesting here, what's interesting about this word because? Exactly, that's a good word too, like signifier, or the buzzword I use is indicator word, right? So we have indicator words, words that not always, you've got to be careful, right? Not always, not categorically, but oftentimes will signal or indicate what type of argument you're going to be dealing with. Or not what type of argument, sorry, but whether a premise or conclusion is about to follow. We also have deductive and inductive argument indicators, and that's kind of what threw me off there for a second. So we'll see in a moment when we get to the types of arguments that we also have indicator words or phrases that can signal what type of argument we're dealing with as well. But going back to this, because is a premise indicator. So we know oftentimes that whatever follows because is going to be a reason to believe their conclusion. What are some other premise indicators? Since, for, and it works the other way too. We have conclusion indicators. Hence, consequently, thus, therefore, as a result. My favorite, are you ready for this one? In conclusion. Right, whenever you see in conclusion, that's a pretty good indicator that you probably have a conclusion coming. Right, so, okay, so good diagnosis here. I think we nailed it, right? There are, and these are all qualified by being in democracies, right? So there are more poor people than the rich people, premise one. The will of the majority is supreme, premise two, and then conclusion, the poor have more power than the rich. How did that seem all right? Kind of makes sense? Okay. Now that we have a better understanding of what exactly an argument is, including its key components, premises and conclusions, we can take a closer look at the two types of arguments that we'll encounter, deductive and inductive arguments.